Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Cara Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I'm very happy to welcome you to the launch event for Ellen Huet's book, Empire of Orgasm, Sex, Power, and the Downfall of a Wellness Cult. Let's give a hand for Ellen. Ellen is joined in conversation tonight by the author Tracy Clark-Flory. Let's give a hand for Tracy as well. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing all your friends to our store. This is exciting. New friends and old. We appreciate you all being here. Thank you for joining us online as well. Hello, online audience. I'm waving to a camera if you can't see what I'm waving to. Very brief business before I let these two take over. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I have been told that photo taking is not only okay, but it is encouraged. So you are allowed to take photos, encouraged, but they can't be bad. No bad photos, only good photos. Please tag our authors in those good photos, but no bad ones. They will not leave your phone. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We are coming to the end of what was, in my very biased opinion, an excellent season, including the event that you are currently attending is part of that season. So do check out what we have coming up in the new year. I'm so sorry to tell you, time is moving forward, but it is. Please do, if you are able, and you have not yet, buy books. Please do buy books from us, your hosts this evening. Thank you so much for people who pre-ordered Ellen's book. Did anyone here take advantage of the pre-order campaign? Yes, we love it. Thank you so much. It means so much to not only a debut author, but so much to pre-order because it shows publishers, it shows people are interested in this book and it's not even on the shelf yet. So it means a great deal, not only to the author, but also to the bookstore. If you've been here before, and if you're on the fence about buying books, which take advantage of the opportunity to have the author sign it, a small pitch, but I'm invested, if you can imagine. If you've been here before, you certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. If you plan on getting your book signed, and I will remind you of this at the end, if you plan on having your book signed at the end, I'm going to write your name on a Post-it note in the signing line so that we do not have to ask Ellen to ask you how to spell your name, even if she knows you very well. Please indulge me in this endeavor. I'm just going to write your name down. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Tracy Clark-Flory is a journalist and author of the forthcoming memoir, My Mother's Daughter, which is coming out in May of next year, and the book Want Me, A Sex Writer's Journey into the Heart of Desire. She's written for Cosmopolitan, Elle, Marie Claire, Salon, The Guardian, and many other publications. Tracy also writes a weekly newsletter and co-hosts Dire Straits, a feminist podcast critiquing heterosexual love, sex, politics, and culture. Let's give one more hand for Tracy Clark-Flory. And last but most certainly not least, Ellen Huet covers technology in Silicon Valley for Bloomberg News. She was the host of the first season of the Bloomberg technology podcast Foundering, which covered the fall of WeWork, and previously worked as a crime and breaking news reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. Her book, Empire of Orgasm, is out today, and it is the reason we're here. Let's keep it going for Ellen Huet.
Hi, everyone. Should we kick off with a little reading?
Sure. Yes, I will be reading, just to start and to set the tone for anyone who has not read the beginning of the book yet. I will be reading the first section, which is just how it starts. So keep that in mind. And it needs no introduction. All right. Prologue. Sensation. Everyone was seated, waiting for Nicole Daedone to enter the room and show them a new kind of orgasm. Only a few dozen people had been selected to attend the event, held in the sumptuous library of an oceanside home north of San Francisco. The spectators sat silently in their chairs, all angled toward a massage table draped with a burgundy sheet. A man named Rob stood at the front of the room. With a placid smile, he informed the audience that they were about to witness an hour-long demonstration, during which they were encouraged to speak out loud whatever sensations they felt in their body. He offered some examples. I feel hot, buzzy, nervous energy in my midriff, and up and down my body I feel chills. I feel sleepy. I feel annoyed. All reactions were welcome, he said. This gathering had one purpose. This is sensation, he said. What we do, what we research, what we are. Finally, it was time for Nicole. Music started to play over the speakers, a slow, warm, shimmering melody with sounds of a sitar. Chairs creaked as the audience twisted around to look back toward the door. Nicole glided down the center aisle like a bride. When she reached the front of the room, an assistant slipped her silky robe off her shoulders. Nicole stood naked in front of the audience, taking it all in. She was smiling faintly with her lips resting together, like Botticelli's Venus, but with flat-ironed, gold-highlighted hair. She was 40 years old. At first, Nicole remained still, gazing straight ahead with a serene face. But as the anticipation in the room built, she began to shake slightly. Her body shuddered and vibrated. Then she broke her pose, drifted over to the massage table, and lay down. Her head pointed away from the audience and her legs toward it, as though all the guests had crowded near the foot of her bed. She spread her knees apart, with the soles of her feet almost touching each other, a position she called legs butterflied open. It left little to the imagination. Another man approached the table, Josh. He was bald, short, and sturdy, wearing a black dress shirt with buttoned cuffs. He exhaled into his cupped hands and rubbed his palms together. He dabbed lube onto his finger. The music in the background swelled. As he arranged his hands into position, his right nestled under her buttocks and the heel of his left pressing on her pubic mound, Nicole began to quiver. Eyes closed, mouth open, brow furrowed, she raised her head slightly from the table and twitched. The moment his finger first touched her clitoris, the audience sighed audibly together. For the next hour, Josh stroked Nicole, who moaned, writhed, and bucked. The soundtrack accelerated from ethereal tones to thumping drum beats. The stroking shifted from hard rubs to softer ones and back, while Nicole laughed and cried, sometimes simultaneously. At peak moments, she stretched her hands out to her side, fingers splayed, muscles and skin taut. Nicole seemed to be levitating to another planet, and the audience members felt themselves pulled skyward in her wake. Every minute or so, as instructed, someone declared their sensations to the room. Heat on my upper arms, relaxation in my chest. Those in the room seemed to understand that an explicitly sexual observation would break the spell. Instead, they kept their commentary suggestive. Vibration in the back of my legs, salivation in my mouth. Josh, the stroker, was sweating. His left index finger slid up and down, his right thumb burrowed into her vagina. Nicole's body kept undulating, her eyes flickering and rolling back in her head. Ah, she breathed, suspended somewhere between ecstatic and possessed. At one point, Nicole's assistant, Raheli, walked to the front of the room and stood by Nicole's bent left leg. As the music pulsed on, Raheli beckoned audience members, one by one, to stand next to her and experience the scene up close. Each person looked past Josh's hunched shoulders to gaze at Nicole's face, while Raheli guided their hands to touch Nicole's thigh. They reached toward her leg reverently, and when they made contact with her skin, some of them shuddered and gasped. Nicole continued moaning, now with a knowing smile. 2 video cameras set up on tripods at the back of the room captured the demo. In the footage, Nicole's body shook and her face contorted. It seemed like some potent sexual life force was electrifying the room, and Nicole was channeling it through her body and out her mouth, fingertips, feet, and bare skin. Her sensational performance suggested a tantalizing promise that Nicole held special knowledge and that she could share it with those who dedicated themselves to her and her practice. The music slowed. Nicole sighed long, low exhales as Josh cupped his hands over her pubic bone and pressed down, ostensibly to calm her body with firm touch. A few moments later, Josh pulled back and adjusted his sleeve. Its cuff was wet and shiny. He hoisted Nicole up to a seated position. Her face was flushed and happy, as though she'd just awakened from a heavenly dream. She gazed out and blinked. Then she exhaled slowly through her mouth, her lips curling up at the corners.
So we really dropped you into the world of One Taste there. I'm so happy to be here to celebrate the release of this book. It is phenomenal, truly. It's such a compassionate and deeply researched look at One Taste and Nicole Dedone and orgasmic meditation. If you're not familiar with what orgasmic meditation is, it's a little different from the hour-long demonstration that we just heard about.
That's
it's
right.
Usually 15 minutes long, right? There's a clothed man who is stroking a woman. And One Taste and Nicole promoted this practice, often with as a form of empowerment and self-improvement, right? And it really exploded in the late aughts here in San Francisco and then sort of went mainstream. Fast forward a decade from that demonstration, and then Ellen's reporting actually surfaced allegations of abuse and exploitation, started to tell a very different story about One Taste, and then the FBI showed up and started investigating. We're going to get into all of that, but I wanted to start really towards the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about One Taste's sort of meditation practice center and commune here in San Francisco on Folsom Street?
Yeah.
What was daily life like there? Can you kind of set the scene for us?
Totally. So, yeah, when One Taste started, this was like the mid 2000s, and they were in San Francisco. And at first, it was kind of this like loose group of people that was slowly getting more organized. And their central practice was, again, orgasmic meditation, this 15-minute partnered meditative clitoral stroking practice, which purported to bring all sorts of benefits: better sex, better relationships, better connection to your desire and your body, a connection to the spiritual, and beyond. And what's interesting is they sold these courses. That was like their public face, was selling courses on orgasmic meditation. But at the same time, they had this community aspect to the company, which was a little bit more on the interior. So if you became involved in One Taste, you might start by taking classes. But those who became more involved might experience what you were talking about, kind of like daily life in one of these like communal places, essentially. At first, it started off as just a center where they held classes, but as they became more involved, it started to be communal residence. So their first communal residence was very, not so far from here in Soma on Folsom Street, I think either between 6th and 7th or 7th and 8th. And first it was this big warehouse, and then they ended up actually getting a former SRO that they then like renovated and had that as a residence. And that's where this communal living, daily life takes place. And so for those who are living there and really immersed in the One Taste life, I think what really struck me in hearing stories about this is that it was fun. Like, people talked about, it felt like being back in college. You would like wake up in the morning, and it, you know, maybe not the college that all of us experienced, to be clear, but daily life might look like waking up in this residence, 7 or 7:30 a.m. You would gather with your co-residents and do 2 sessions of orgasmic meditation. Okay, so not like college. Or if it was like college for you, come talk to me, I guess. And so, but you know, this was like a part, this was their practice. And so if you imagine if you were, for example, living at like an ashram or something, you would get up and you'd meditate in the morning. This is what they were doing. So you wake up, you do 2 rounds of orgasmic meditation, switching partners in between. That was not something, you would do it with kind of anyone. I'm not like limited to which partners you might have a romantic relationship with. You might do 2 rounds of orgasmic meditation, and then you know, some people worked in the kitchen making communal meals for everyone. Other people worked on the sales team at One Taste, where their main work during the day was calling up sales leads and pitching them on buying like the next One Taste course. Sometimes all the residents would like go and do Bikram yoga together, have another meal. In the afternoon, they would do 2 more rounds of orgasmic meditation. And then in the evening, they might prepare for like a public event, like a night of communication games, which was how they tended to bring the public into One Taste to expose them to some of the ideas and practices of the group. And so in general, people talked about this time and they were like, this was really fun. It was like living with all your friends. There's a lot of sex, there's a lot of richness and exploration. And that's something that I hope people take away from this is like, you know, you might think that joining a group like this is like, I don't know, painful and unhappy, but it generally is not. And especially not at the beginning. I think it's quite thrilling.
Yes, right. And so the demonstration that you were just reading about was like 2008, I think, right? And it was a year later that the New York Times wrote this big feature about it. And that was where like Nicole's star really started to rise and One Taste sort of was catapulted into the mainstream. Can you talk a little bit about like what it was about that particular time in the late aughts, culturally speaking, that kind of allowed for this, you know, pretty fringe, unusual practice to hit the mainstream? And what was it about the Bay Area also as a setting that kind of acted as a launch pad for that?
Totally. I mean, there's a few things. First of all, San Francisco has always been a place of sexual experimentation. I think when people first heard about One Taste back in, you know, if they were reading about it in 2009 in the New York Times, they were probably like, oh, those San Franciscans like at it again. But that speaks to something real about what happens in the Bay Area. This is a place where people like to experiment. And I think Goop launched in 2008, 2009, something like that. It's the very beginning of the wellness industry boom, which is this like, I don't know, this commercial behemoth that comes out of nowhere. This idea that you might be paying for holistic wellness in the form of detoxes and classes and workshops and like, I think that was one of the major lifting forces that helped One Taste get pretty close to the mainstream. Again, it's always going to be a little bit off to the side because it's so provocative, but the kind of the wellness boom, the idea that, you know, in the 2010s, remember how much excitement there was about kind of like CEO, girl boss. I hate those terms, but you know what I mean? Like in 2012, those were earnestly used. Many of us, I'm sure, remember, but the idea that like women founders were something that we were like really excited about lifting up. I think Nicole really like rode that wave. And then simply the idea that like the 2010s was an incredible time to be like a startup founder in San Francisco. I think that was another thing that sort of supported Nicole and One Taste as this fast-growing startup run by women about wellness, and just all these things kind of coming together helped make this unusual practice feel like a real business.
Mm-hmm. Right. And one of the things that was so interesting to learn in the book that I had no idea was that actually the practice of orgasmic meditation had actually originated earlier. It was called deliberate orgasm, and that Nicole had learned it while living at the Welcomed Consensus, which was a commune that you write about at length, how it sounds like rife with sexism and also violence against women. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found out about those early days where she was learning this practice, and then how she then came to adapt this practice that she learned in this horrifyingly misogynistic context, and adapted it as a tool for women's liberation?
Totally. Yeah, basically there are these two predecessor groups that taught this practice called deliberate orgasm. One of them started in the late 60s and was called Morehouse, and they have this long, complicated history, but it was essentially one of their practices was this meditative clitoral stroking practice. And then there was a spin-off group called the Welcomed Consensus, which had some presence in San Francisco as well as off in like a more rural ranch north in like, I don't know, near the Klamath River or something. And so Nicole had, as far as I can tell from my reporting, more exposure to this spin-off group, the Welcomed Consensus. But notably, both of these groups taught this practice. They called it deliberate orgasm. It was not as structured as what we now know about orgasmic meditation. And it was, and they were both run by men. And I think that was, and neither of them was like attempting to be a business. Like they sold courses in order to make money, but it was not their orientation to be spreading the word of this practice through commercialization. And so Nicole, as far as I can tell, was more immersed in the Welcome Consensus, where, yes, the leader, according to many people I spoke to, was someone who, showed lots of violence against women, came up with philosophies that justified violence against women, which are a little complicated. Happy to get into them if we want. And also, would get drunk and hurt people. And it was just seemingly like a pretty dark place. And I think what's notable about what Nicole did is, based on everything I learned, it seems like she looked at what she saw here and saw promise and potential for something that could be bigger, and saw the potential to make her own version of it where she was the leader and where she was kind of the person who was the origin story. And that is pretty savvy because it's a practice that I think needs to be sold by a woman. It just doesn't feel, I think it was just like a smarter marketing strategy. And most notably, she decided the way I'm going to spread the word about orgasmic meditation is by making it a business, which these other groups I think shied away from, or we're not interested in trying to chase mainstream success in that way.
Yeah. And your book really makes clear that One Taste used women's sexuality to lure in customers, that there was this sort of implicit promise that if you were coming to a One Taste event, men would have access to women's bodies. I was actually really fascinated to learn that a lot of the men who showed up at One Taste had actually started by doing pickup artist workshops, and then that they had sort of, some folks who had wanted more of a spiritual approach had then shifted over to One Taste. And as a result of all of that, you write that a lot of the women residents felt pressed to put their own bodies on the line, essentially to make a sale, to sell workshops. And so it seems like there was this constant tension between selling women sexual empowerment and selling men access to their bodies. How did residents at that time sort of make sense of that tension or hold that tension?
Yeah, my sense is what would tend to happen is women who were residents in some of these early communal residences at One Taste might be told we have a course happening this weekend and there are, part of the course is going to involve doing the orgasmic meditation practice or the training. And so we're going to need to have partners for some of the men who have signed up for the course and who don't have a partner. So it was, socially expected of them to participate in that way. This is what was described to me. And my guess is that they felt like they really believed in the mission of spreading orgasmic meditation to the world, and that this was part of what it would take. Like, it would mean that in order to do this greater, honestly, they probably thought of it as like philanthropic. Like, Nicole has used the word philanthropist to describe herself. There was this sense that spreading orgasmic meditation to the world was going to heal people. And so if you really buy into that mission, you can imagine how you could rationalize, like, okay, like, this thing that maybe I'm not that excited to do, but I'm doing it for the greater good. And in addition to that, there were also principles and life philosophies that were propagated within One Taste that might have also primed some of these people to say yes to something like that, which was, for example, the general idea that you would be gaining more in spiritual power if you could have sex with, people kind of outside of your preference zone or that kind of thing. So
aversion practice,
yeah,
right?
I was like, we can get into it if you want, but yeah, that's basically that's an example of one of the philosophies where they were like, oh, you can gain spiritual and sexual power if you are able to do things outside of your preferences or to do things that you have an aversion to. So they would call it aversion practice. And so you can imagine how all these things weave together. It's not just one thing, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it's this gradual, but if you have someone who has decided, like, yeah, I'm going to adopt the philosophies of this group because I see and believe that they're going to help me grow and they're going to, like, bring me to a better life, and I also believe in the mission of this company, then you can imagine how they might get to the point where they're like, yes, like, I will say yes to this ask of, being an own partner to someone in order to, like, further the business's growth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see in some cases how the asks sort of got bigger and bigger over time, which brings me to the part of the story where you enter in. So in 2018, you started reporting a very consequential story on One Taste for Bloomberg. It sounds like that article initially was, like, supposed to be a very light sort of story. This was not what you were expecting. You were not expecting to write a book of this size.
No, certainly not.
So can you tell me about how that story came about and then what you started to find as you pulled that thread?
Totally. And I guess I will say that, like, there's a lot of people in the back. We could probably scoot, and there might be a little bit more bleacher seating here for anyone who's unable to see or wants to venture forth. I don't want anyone to feel too uncomfortable. Yes, in 2017, I got an email, as I get, there's lots of journalists in this room. We get many of these emails every day, which is just like a pitch from a publicist explaining, like, hey, I have a, up here, sorry. Like, hey, I have a new client, their company, and they like, are you interested in maybe writing about them? And so, sorry. And so, in this case, I took a second look at this pitch, in part because I knew the publicist who had sent it to me. We had interacted on another story, and she was basically saying, like, oh, you write about startups? Like, I have this new client. It's a fast-growing woman-led wellness startup called One Taste. Maybe you're interested in writing about them. And, as with any pitch, it's like you kind of don't know. Most of the time, it, like, doesn't really go anywhere. In this case, I ended up taking the meeting. It's an intriguing topic. I had heard about orgasmic meditation before. And I went and had a preliminary meeting with the people who were running the company at the time. And they gave me the basic pitch. They called themselves the Whole Foods of sexuality. They're like, we're the organic, good for you. This may have been before or after the Amazon acquisition. Anyway, they're like, we're the organic, good for you version of sexuality. And I was like, okay, sure. And then I wasn't sure if I was going to do a story. And then I mentioned it to someone that I know. I was like, oh, I might write about One Taste. And one thing led to another. I ended up getting in touch with someone who had been a previous like customer and sort of someone who was involved in One Taste, and they were really like, actually, I had a pretty terrible experience. I feel like I was taken advantage of, and they explained some of that, and it just was my first clue that there was maybe something else to the story. And so, I mean, it took many months, but then I found other people who had similar experiences, and then it kind of expanded beyond what I first thought it was going to be. And yeah, that's how I ended up writing that first story about them, which then, at the time, of course, I didn't know it was going to lead to this. I didn't know it was going to lead to like a criminal investigation. I kind of forget the original question, but
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I believe it was pretty shortly after your article published that they kind of went quiet for a time.
Yeah.
And then you heard that the FBI was looking into it.
Yeah.
And I believe that you kept looking into the story. What was it like to keep pulling thread on this story alongside the FBI? Like knowing that the FBI is out there investigating this at the same time.
Well, it's funny because they don't want to talk to me, and and I've never managed to speak to the, so I knew, of course. So basically it was like the way that I even tracked the FBI investigation as it was evolving was that many of my sources who I'd spoken to for that first story, or with whom I was speaking now for the book, would call me or text me and say like, hey, the agents came by again yesterday, or like we talked for 3 hours, or like here's what we talked about, or like this time they brought in assistant U.S. attorney. I was like, oh gosh, thanks, keep me updated, and so that for many years that was the pattern. And I remember cold calling. Of course, I knew the agents' names. I got one of their phone numbers. I remember cold calling him. He was like, I can't talk to you. And it was just very devastating. And I think I tried a few more times, and he was uninterested because I think it puts their work at risk. And maybe if I was better sourced in the FBI, I would have known more of it. It's fine. And then when the prosecutors came involved, like, again, I remember trying to get them to talk to me, and they were like, did not respond. And even when we were at trial, oh my God, I ran into one of the prosecutors in the bathroom and did not try to talk to her. It was like after the verdict or something, and we just sort of said hi. And I was like, hey. She was like, hey. As if like, don't even try. So I knew what they were doing. And it was during COVID. They were like, in 2020, they were still flying around. Like they were taking it seriously. But yeah, they were not interested in speaking with me. So I just felt their shadow presence, and then we never got to talk. It's very unsatisfying. I hope I get to talk to them someday.
Maybe they'll come to one of your book
Yeah.
events. So can you kind of lay out just briefly, like how did the allegations against One Taste and Nicole kind of evolve from that first article? Like it seems like it grew quite a bit.
Well, one of the, thematically, there's a lot of similarities, but one of the major things that I had no idea about when I wrote that first story that turned out to be, a big part of the book and actually a big part of the criminal case was the setup that One Taste had arranged, in which basically their main financial backer, who was this venture capitalist, who was also Nicole's boyfriend at the time, had been, according to many people who told me about this and sworn testimony at trial, had an arrangement in which he was provided with sexual favors for years, both like these elaborate BDSM scenes for his birthday involving One Taste employees doing all sorts of, Wizard of Oz themes, 7 Deadly Sins. That's a pretty fun chapter. I encourage you to get to it. And also that he had this system, they had arranged this system of sexual handlers for him. So this series of women who were asked to take on this special role in which they would typically live at his house or visit him very often, walk his dog, do grocery shopping, tidy up, and also give him usually a hand job every day, something like that. And this was kind of this like shadow system within One Taste that I think kind of gets to the heart of what's so complicated about this, because there are people who held the role of being handlers for this man who are still to this day some of One Taste's most loyal employees and they're like executives at the company, and I think they see it as having been like that there was nothing wrong about that. And then there are also people who, again, testified at trial and spoke to me at length, who said that they felt that this was like extremely exploitative situation, that they had been slowly, they didn't use the word groom, so I'm not going to use it, but slowly like taught a life philosophy and like under a set of pressures where they then felt like they said yes, but it was not a freely given yes, which is just really complicated in terms of, the whole book talks about like the complication of agency under pressure. Yes. Like what is consent under pressure? I think anyway, we can talk about that, but.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of complexity and things that need to be handled very delicately, you write about Nicole being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Yeah. And you draw a connection between that traumatic personal history and her attempt to turn sex and pleasure into something that is healing. I'm wondering how you wrestled in writing this book with these sort of competing visions of Nicole as a victim and also as a perpetrator.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, this was one of the hardest parts of the book, was understanding how to address, what may or may not have happened between Nicole as a child and her father, who, according to court records, was a convicted child sex abuser. He had, that part is, as far as I know, not in question. And she has spoken, so yeah, basically her father was not like a frequent presence in her life. She was largely raised by her mom, but her father, she had she describes having a lot of love and adoration for her father when she was a child. And she has at times spoken about how he had been convicted of abusing other children, but had often sidestepped the question of whether he had ever done something untoward to her. And so in reporting this book, it's just, it's very complicated. And I think, basically what I found was that people who knew her in her 20s around that time told me that she had told them at times that her father had abused her. And then what's more complicated is that later she reshaped the narrative of what that meant to her to be something in which she was like an instigator or complicit in it in some way, which, I'm not an expert on the subject, but in talking to experts, they would say that that is actually quite a common response to like find a framing that helps you find agency. Regardless, it's all very complicated. And then what makes it even more complicated is that within one case, there was also a philosophy that seeing yourself as a victim was like a lesser mindset, one that was small-minded or weak, and that to fall into victim mindset was largely seen as like a derogatory thing that you could say to someone. And instead, you should be seeing your life as something in which you are 100% responsible for your experience. Which is not a terrible idea on its own, and like can often be quite useful. And in fact, if any of you have ever taken like a course at Landmark or like any of these other courses, will often advocate for the same thing because it has value. But then it can also get taken too far, where this idea that like to completely erase the possibility of victimhood is quite complicated. And so I guess I just tried in the book to present all these sides of her in the hope that the reader would understand and come to their own conclusions about how one thing might have influenced the other. But like, it is interesting that she adopted a mindset in which like victimhood was kind of not an option. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you do an amazing job of holding all of that in the book. It's clear that for a lot of women, you write that was the first time they received pleasure without any pressure to reciprocate. They felt free, released of a burden that had weighed down every sexual interaction they'd ever had with another person. It sounds like there were people who had very healthy and transformative experiences with oming. can oming be disentangled from its abusive and toxic origins, or are these things hopelessly entangled?
I mean, I think there are former one-taste people who have tried to build businesses in which they, well, one thing that's hard is that I believe One Taste has trademarked the term orgasmic meditation. So whatever you're calling it, it would not be Om, unless something dramatic changes. So I would like to believe that that's possible, but I haven't seen it happen yet, or I haven't seen it get traction. And I do think that is one of the sorrows of this story, is that people who did study this practice deeply and who were really immersed in One Taste and who have left and felt like there was a lot of harm within that experience, nevertheless said to me that they were, that it was tragic to them that this practice never got the chance to live separate from the company that popularized it, because they feel like it's a wasted, that there's this wasted potential, that like they do still believe that the principles of this practice, again, like this, what you mentioned, this non-reciprocity, this idea that you could have a structure that, or a practice that's structured radically around women receiving sexual pleasure with no expectation of reciprocity. It's like, when else in life does that happen? It basically doesn't. And so I think they feel like there's a lot of value in that, and then it is lost because it is so closely tied with this company that, that they don't stand by. This is just, the perspective of those people. Yeah.
I'm going to squeeze in one last question, then I know we have to go to audience questions. So I know that you actually live in an intentional community here in the Bay Area. And you also observe in the book that there are cult-like aspects to the tech scene that you cover as a journalist. I wonder how working on this book, whether it had a personal impact in terms of how you think of your own engagement with utopian dreaming and, experiments in, alternate ways of living and structuring our lives, but also with how you and all of us brush up against these, cult-like phenomena in everyday life.
Totally. I mean, I kind of, at times when I'm at work and I have like a story idea, I mean, there are some of my colleagues here, when I have a story idea and I'm like, oh, there's a cult angle. I sometimes feel like that person who has the hammer and they're like, everything's got a cult angle to it. That's obviously not true. But it has been surprising to me to see cult dynamics show up in other things that I cover. Like my colleague and I just wrote a big story about people who have experienced delusional spirals after using ChatGPT for like many hours a day, and what that relationship is like when you have like an intense emotional relationship with a chatbot that separates you from normal reality, and can have some very serious effects for people. And it was so clear to me that there were cult parallels there. This idea that having that relationship could isolate you from the other relationships in your life. It could become your sole source of truth, at which point you ignore contradicting information and only trust ChatGPT, or that it could and part of what would bring you in, which is true across many cults, is this sense of wonder, access to special and unique, or special and previously unseen knowledge, and the way that there's that emotional experience of feeling like you've discovered something special can be extremely emotionally alluring. So anyway, it's like, I do think that writing this book has opened my eyes to seeing not just what those cult dynamics look like in unexpected places, because I would not have, when we started that story, that's not what I was thinking that we would end up discovering. But it has also made me appreciate how much decisions that we make are a reflection of the social environment that we're in, because so many people who were in One Taste talked to me about how all of a sudden, if you get very involved in this group, it becomes a very tight and insular social bubble that you live in, where everyone in, all of your coworkers are in the same bubble, as well as your lovers, your friends, your roommates. It's all the same group of people. So all of a sudden, the stakes feel very high for you to feel like you belong, and they feel very high for you to feel like you have that you are in the correct status or getting approval within a group, which I think as social creatures we all want. And so it was humbling to me to realize that the decisions we make are not really a reflection of like our independent thoughts. It is so much a reflection of the approval of the people around us, the norms, the like, you know, understanding that you would like step up in status if you did action A versus lose status if you did action B. So, I mean, that's much broader than just cults. It's like, well, social behavior is a reflection of our environment, for sure. And if you're in an unusual environment, you will make unusual choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think we're ready for audience questions.
I'm just wondering if there were any like queer and trans people in One Piece. Orgasmic meditation is very like genitalia forward.
Totally. As far as I know, trans people, I really actually only know of one, but queer people, there were a fair number, and they did have an unusual experience, which is especially queer women tended to have an experience of joining One Taste. And again, this is according to people who told it to me, being pressured subtly to behave more like in a more heteronormative fashion. Like women were encouraged to grow their hair out, to dress really femme, to like wear dresses, to have sex with men. That like comes up a lot in chapter 10 because it starts off with the story of these two women who came in as a couple and who part of the lessons that they were taught while they were there was basically that they should be experimenting by having sex with men. So there was this interesting tension, which is actually that Nicole has in her history dated women as well as men. And you know, obviously San Francisco is a very like queer friendly place, but there was this, at least it was surprising to me, this like pressure toward heteronormativity and heterosexual behavior that I don't really have a good explanation for why. I mean, I can speculate that that made it like more marketable to the mainstream, but I've never really gotten like a good answer. Yeah.
It sounds like you've been really careful in your language to kind of hold nuance and not call this like sex trafficking. And I'm curious, when you talk about your interactions with the FBI, like them not wanting to talk to you when you called them, I'm curious, it sounds like you kind of busted a sex trafficking ring. Like, why did they not call you? And what, like, maybe that's speculative, but I'm curious, like, how that all kind of went down.
I don't know. I think, look, I'm not a lawyer and certainly not like a prosecutor. I think their goal is generally to talk to people with firsthand experience because they are able to be witnesses in the way that I think those people are much more useful to them than I am. And I don't take it personally if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. And if I am careful about my words, part of the reason is that, you know, One Taste is a fairly litigious group and has, you know, there was a Netflix documentary about One Taste in 2022 that I was was interviewed for, and there was a BBC documentary about them in 2021 or something like that. Both of these resulted in lawsuits from One Taste, arguing that they had been, that both of those products were defamatory. And, you know, so it's just like, it's something that I both care on principle about trying to present. You know, I'm not trying to come in with like too hard of a take. And I think some of that is just like the training you get as a journalist. And then some of it is like practical. It's like, I really want to be careful about what I say because there could be consequences. Yeah.
What was hardest to leave on the cutting room floor? Most liberating, or take it however you want?
In my first draft, I had certain like entire chapters devoted to supporting characters who had really like bared their soul to me, told me these like very moving stories that unfortunately were maybe like just a little too tangential to the point that I was trying to make. And there's like an entire chapter on this one person who I just cut. She was fortunately like fine with it, but I felt sad. And then there was actually a lot more material about the history of the two predecessor groups early on, and I think I was just like, I had spent all this time trying to understand it, so I was like, it must belong in the book. And then every reader who read it was like, it's way too long. Like, it takes way too long to get to the action. Like, we cannot be spending this time, you know, learning about these people who don't show up later. And there's a lot of like older men who advised Nicole in the early days. And like some of my early readers were like, I keep getting mixed up. Like, who are these older men? It's like, there's one older guy and then there's another one. That was hard. And so that, yeah, cutting those was probably, but I think that was all a dramatic improvement from, sometimes you just need to write it and then you can throw it away. Throw it away, yeah.
You spoke to how this was a product of the teens and late aughts Silicon Valley scene, and as you covered WeWork, that was a time of a lot of fake businesses, let's call it, businesses that didn't make a lot of sense financially. I'm curious, can you speak to that aspect of this? Did the economics actually make sense? I understand there's a lot of like exploited labor, people were not getting paid. Was it actually making money? Was it all just a house of cards?
So they did actually make money at a certain point. So, you know, unlike some unnamed tech companies, which I won't, you know, put on the spot, but they did. So for the first 7 years of the company's existence, they did not make money. And I believe that largely the way that they kept the doors open was through this arrangement with this investor who loaned them money and paid for computers and bought business expenses, you know, that kind of thing. Many people who worked at One Taste over the years also told me that in general they feel like they were sometimes paid, and there was also an expectation that they work for free, or that they like volunteer their labor as part of their showing their dedication to the group. So presumably that helped with the, you know, profit margins. And at some point when the investor fell upon financial hard times and began asking for a loan repayment, this was roughly 2012, there was a push within the company to start making more money by selling more and more expensive courses. And so that, you know, some of these courses that they were selling cost upward of $20,000 or $30,000. And there was like a renewed sales effort for many years to sell more of those courses, not just to pay back the investor, but to then continue to keep the company going. So, you know, they did, according to their own numbers, turn a profit for, you know, 5 or 6 years from 2013 to presumably 2018 or something like that. So, you know, a real business. Yeah.
Was that the era where the sales team would watch videos of lions hunting before they went out? That was a fun detail.
I mean, I don't know exactly when they did that, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was part of it. Yeah, they had, according to people who were on the sales team, the Rachel Cherwitz, who is actually Nicole Dadone's like co-defendant, so the other person who was charged with the crime, she was the head of sales for many years, and she would have the sales team watch these YouTube videos of like lions hunting as a pack and like attacking wildlife, and she would say things like bite the spine and like hunters go hunt as a way to like encourage the sales team to go make sales. And there are like, you know, some of my sources had shared with me like text threads that the sales team were on, and like it's like aggressive, all caps text, like many emojis, like always having to check in. I mean, they were really ahead of the game on like rapid group chats, like back in a time when I think like not that many people, like group chats were not as much of a thing. They were using group chats to great effect. Yeah.
Is it still going on under a different leadership?
Yes.
What's the status?
Yeah. So in 2017, before actually I even started reporting on this company, Nicole sold her shares in the company and stepped down as CEO. I think she actually just wanted to like not run the business anymore. I gather that she was kind of tired of it, and she found these new buyers, a group of 4 at the time, and then one of them dropped out, and these 3 people are still the owners of One Taste. And in the time since, and even since Nicole has, so there was a trial this summer. Nicole and Rachel were convicted of a federal crime and were taken into custody the next day. So they've been in a federal jail since June, and they are awaiting sentencing, which could come later this year or beginning of next. And even in their absence, the company is continuing to offer courses. So actually just like a month ago, they offered a new course that they're calling the Connection Program, which is an homage to the coaching program, which was one of their like marquee courses in the 2010s. I don't know for sure how they are supporting the company. The new owners do have access to family wealth. And my best guess is that is part of what has paid for legal defense. I mean, they had expensive lawyers. So how exactly it's working is a question mark to me, but it is still a functioning company. You could sign up for an own membership today.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm gonna let you choose.
Oh,
given the fact that your own article broke or like opened a federal investigation into the group to some degree, like, do you think it's normal or common for somebody researching a topic, a journalist researching a topic to this degree, to have their lives intertwined with the story itself, or do you think that was uncommon?
well, technically, I don't know what prompted the federal investigation, and they could have predated my story. So I'll just say that. I guess I can't think of any off the top of my head. It doesn't surprise me. Like I can imagine other examples where like if you are covering a subject for many years and there is like impact from your reporting, like I do think as much as we would perhaps like to exist in a journalistic bubble where all we do is report and there's no, we don't become part of the story, I think like it does end up happening. And so it doesn't strike me as so unusual, but I do think when I think back to writing that first story, I just didn't anticipate this. But it's been so long that I think it's like hard for me to imagine it unfolding in a different way. But it's true that, I don't know, like, yeah, it has just been a surprising path. Yeah.
I think that's all we have time for, and we're ready to...
Can we keep it going for Ellen Huet? Congratulations. Thank you for writing this book and sharing it with us and for all of the tremendous effort that went into reporting. Tracy, thank you for reading it and so thoroughly and coming with these questions. And you are all deeply informed about this now and had great questions, so I appreciate you as well. I will be brief and let you know that we have books for purchase at the front register. You can find them there. Ellen is going to be signing books right here in a moment. That is very exciting. I love the enthusiasm. We're going to take we're going to take a beat to just kind of orient ourselves here. So please don't rush the stage, but we'll start the signing line approximately here. And I'm going to write your name on a Post-it. Even if you know Ellen quite well, I'm going to write your name on a Post-it. Indulge me, if you will. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Don't move, I want to take a picture.
Oh, don't move. You all look so great.
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Oh my god, I love that. Thank you.